Item 2, approval of the resolution for tax levy presented by Dr. Bell.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, Mr. Superintendent. The budget that y'all just passed, as you know, is predicated on a levy of 23.98 mils. We've had the appropriate advertisements run under state law relative to how that's calculated. We've had 3 millage rate hearings, one on June 1st and 2 today, okay? So I think everything is in line for you to vote on the resolution to levy or to recommend to the county that it levy the 23.98 mils to fund the appropriate component of this budget that y'all have just accepted and passed.
Moved by, oh, is there any discussion? Yeah. Moved by Mr. Orson, second by Mr. McMahon. Is there any discussion? Mr. Orson.
Oh, thank you. So one of the discussion points we had during the course of the year as we saw the prospect for the fund balance growing was whether we were also going to be mindful of opportunities to at least return some of what we collected back to our taxpayers. And one of the questions I had asked the superintendent and you all was about the value of a mill. So I think we have a growing fund balance. I think there are projections about the going forward tax digest that could even improve our position by the end of fiscal year 16. I know that your projections are based on a conservative approach about where we are currently with the fund balance. But with that said, I would like to propose that we change the millage rate and to decrease it by 0.25 to a millage rate of 23.73. That's my motion. I move that we amend the millage rate, the proposed millage rate to 23.73 for a decrease of 0.25.
Can I get a second? Second by Mr. Jester. Is there any discussion?
Let me just, I want to ask a clarifying question because if I understood your response, sorry, that your projected value of a mill was $18 million. Is that correct? I saw.
We responded to your question to use the digest, the projected digest that's been advertised, Mr. Arson.
Right.
Using that digest value, it's the 18.77 million per mill. Now, in actuality, the revenue that will come in after the payment of the commission to the tax commissioner's office and after erosion associated with property tax appeals and collecting less than 100 cents on the dollar, it's about 17.5 million per mill.
Okay, so a reduction of a quarter mill would be about 4.4 million.
$4.375, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to make sure that I was in the right ballpark. So that would be the projected impact if we were to reduce the millage rate by the proposed amendment.
At this point in the process, that would be the projected impact of less revenue to fund the general fund. Yes,
right.
Sir.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Further discussion? We're still in discussion. Yeah. Dr. Marley, I see you reaching for your mic, and I can't see it from up here.
One last question.
Yes.
So that reduction would also reduce what we have in the general fund balance, and that would reduce what we have to operate with and for future monies to be spent. We look at salaries, other things like that, operating budgets in the classroom and the like.
All things considered equal, Dr. Marley, there would be this $4.4 million less in the fund balance at the end of 16. All other things equal. Now, we know that is not the way it happens. There'll be some puts and some takes as we go through the year, but this action will have the effect of reducing the projected revenue of $4.4 million. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, I think Dr. Bell may have some background information. I'm not sure whether or not this is the time he would need to share it because there is some confusion about the growth in the ad valorem tax digest in DeKalb County, and particularly the impact it has played or is playing on increased revenues for DeKalb County School District. We developed a chart, and I think Dr. Bell has it, and of course it's up to the discretion of the board how they respond to it, but I think we need to make sure that the board and the public is clearly aware of what has actually occurred with our tax digest. There is a mistaken belief that there has been a significant increase in that ad valorem tax digest, and it's just not true. And I would like to share that through Dr. Bell so that at least you will have the information before you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. And Margaret, I guess they've been handed out? Okay. The histogram that the superintendent is referring to...
Can you raise the mic up a little bit to you? There you go. We need more.
Okay. Yes, sir. Indicates the history of taxes levied in the district. Of course, you can see the effect of the Great Recession. All right. The additional millage that was levied in 12 of 1 mil, taking us from 22.98 to 23.98, is indicated by the red boxes at the end of the last 4 years. Now, if you can take a look at the chart, and you'll see that right now, as we are projecting, based on total digest, which doesn't consider the commissions we pay the tax commissioner and doesn't consider collecting less than 100 cents on the dollar and doesn't consider the effect of thousands of property tax appeals, it's at $450 million. But take a look at where that puts us in relation to our history. That's about at the 04, 05 level. If you take a look at that now, and keep in mind, the levy is not what you collect. The levy is the gross calculation based on the net assessed digest. The 450, if you go back to where, before the run-up, okay, that's about, I want to say, 05 or 06. So in the trough right here, which we experienced, which is very painful, okay, during the Great Recession, okay, we haven't recovered yet. We have not recovered yet.
And the key point, to Dr. Bell's point, if you look at 2008, which was the peak in terms of the levy, the ad valorem tax levied was $505 million. That was the peak. We were projected at $450 in 2015. We are $55.4 million from the peak. And also, another critical point, in 2012, the school board increased the millage rate by 1 mil. And even with that 1 mil increase, we're still $55 million from where we were in the peak. And so that's significant. And I know there's been some discussion, I read the papers like everybody else. We're not there yet. Now, what I would like to suggest, being a reform politician, a recovering politician, I like a tax cut just like everybody else. Mr. Jester wrote me an email, and which I won't comment directly on, but I'll accept it as what it was. I smiled when I received it. But one of the things I think we can do going forward as we are rebuilding is that we need to set the goals and projections. One of the things you all have done extremely well as a board that I compliment you on, and that made it possible, I think, for us to make some positive changes, was that you set clear, concise goals for the administration every year in terms of how you wanted us to proceed, what your expectations were, and ultimately I was evaluated that on the end of the year. I don't recall managing the budget to generate a rollback as one of the goals that was set for this administration. But I do think it's appropriate, if we are continuing down this road, to ask Dr. Bell and the new superintendent to manage the budget in the upcoming fiscal year so that we can be in a position to roll back taxes at a particular time. It's very difficult to do after the fact. It really is. It needs to be, and I would hope the board will, as you've done with teacher salaries and academic achievement and graduation rates, say very clearly to Dr. Green and to Dr. Bell that this is what we would like to work towards in the coming year so that we can manage to it so that it is consistent, is not at the end of the day, let's do something. And I just think it's going to flow much better. And then we can give out a more substantial tax increase. You know, and I'll compliment the county on what they did, but at the end of the day, it was a gesture and no criticism. But I think we ought to manage this budget in a way so we can make a significant, if the board decides at a future date, millage rollback for the county. That's just my thought, but, you know, I don't have a vote.
Any further discussion on the proposed amendment? I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Jester.
So the high watermark on tax collections over the last 20 years should not be what we consider minimum adequate funding. If you look at how much we've collected, we're actually collecting quite a bit compared to previous years. And for posterity, I've said before that the Georgia Constitution says we can only charge 20 mills for school board taxes unless we have some sort of exception. And we had that exception in the past, and that was DeKalb College, but we don't do that anymore. Georgia currently has 180 school districts. We're the second highest millage rate. Other schools are at 20 mills or below, and the ones that are over 20 mills have that other encumbrance, the other schools that they're doing or libraries they're doing. So if you could give us your best estimate on why it is that we can't operate under the same 20 mills as everyone else in the state does.
Mr. Jester, let me just sort of put it in perspective. You know, May 18th in 1971, the Board of Education asked the ordinary of DeKalb County to conduct a referendum. And the call language of the referendum is crystal clear that we asked the voters to approve the capability of the school district going from a cap millage of 20 to 25. In the language of that referendum call, there is no mention whatsoever of this college support, okay? And that the voters did grant that, and we've been operating legally under that limitation of 25 all these years.
Agreed. Okay. But 50 years ago, as it were, almost, you know, a lot of deals were made on a handshake, and it was agreed that that's why that was done. And eventually, whether we get down to 20, somebody's going to do it for us. And the legislator, I know the legislators are talking about it, taking that 25 away and making it 20. And I'm concerned that that could happen, and if it does, I would rather we wean ourselves down to that gradually as opposed to us going from almost 24 to 20 overnight.
Okay. In addition, the budget that y'all just approved puts about $46 million into additional salary payments. Of course, that's important to the 65% target, okay? But that's going to recur every year as we go forward. When you do a salary adjustment like that, you might think of it just in 1 year, but it's going to be embedded in the salary scale. Okay, so that's one thing, the fact that we're rebuilding our salaries to be competitive. Secondarily, we have liabilities out there that I think y'all are aware of, okay, that could impact us, okay, all of a sudden or on a gradual basis as we go forward. The fact that at the best projection of the digest, which has not grown back to the pre-recession levels, we're still going to levy $55 million less, okay, than we did back at that point in time, okay, should tell you how much we've lost in terms of millions of dollars to run the district since the recession took place. Based upon that, and considering Mr. Thurman's comments about having a plan to manage the millage rate, okay, I think it would be unwise this evening to roll back the millage rate without having a plan to go forward to accommodate some of the things, some of the liabilities, planned and unplanned, that we face. The ERP project, for one, okay? Outstanding litigation, for two, okay? And as Mr. Thurman likes to say, that the next recession is already cooked into the books.
I agree, but there are 180 other school districts that have that are trying to compete with salaries and have liabilities as well. And our millage rate should be used to level off the cycle that we have, the ups and downs. And I want to say, I think that that was what the legislature was thinking when they said that we had to have these millage rate hearings and say that we're increasing taxes on people, even though the actual rate itself is increasing. So when it goes up, our digest, what we're collecting, our millage rate should go down. And when the tax digest goes down, our millage rate goes up, thereby making everything level. I want to think that's what the legislature was thinking, and I think the millage rate is a much better way to level things off, more so than the general fund balance.
Mr. Chair, and to Mr. Justice's point, and like I say, well, as I've said, I think managing to a millage rate rollback is the correct thing to do. I mean, no one can argue that point. Right now, I think you will be funding it with your increased QBE collections. That's a problem. If you really look at it, these two main funding sources, one has not replenished or rebuilt itself. The one area where we are generating some additional revenue, the majority of it, is with the QBE funding formula through the work of Dr. Preston and others. So what we would really be doing is funding that with your increased QBE collection, which I don't think is what the board contemplates or would want to do, and even what our constituents are thinking. I understand they see an $80 million surplus and they say, well, obviously they're not managing well, because all they do is spend money and hire more educrats in the central office. So the only reason that this fund balance is growing is ad valorem tax increases. And see, that's just not true. That's part of the narrative that hurts us. When you look at the data itself, it contradicts that.
I guess if we had a better idea of how much we needed to adequately educate children, then we would know that with the correct line that we need to walk on. It's
tough. I mean, I wish I could tell you really, but it's complicated, and you know, I'm a novice and I'm still learning. And but I would just hope that you all could. And like I said, I don't want to repeat myself, but the best way to help your new superintendent is to set some clear goals and objectives and allow him to manage to those goals. And it's difficult. You get whiplash. If one meeting increased funding to the classroom, the second meeting, you know, let's reduce the millage rate. I mean, we're moving in too many different directions. And as Dr. Bales mentioned, there are always unforeseen circumstances, some more threatening than others, that could upset this apple cart in an instant. And I'm really, really concerned about that. And I know you all are as well.
Dr. Morley.
Well, certainly. Respectfully, Mr. Orson, and we've talked about this, and now hearing the explanation and everything, I agree. I keep going back to, we've only been 2 years. You know, you take a 2-year-old toddler and what they're doing, and they're learning to walk and maybe potty train and other things like that, but they're still not ready to go on their own. And I think that it might be a little remiss and premature, hearing the explanations from Mr. Thurman and Dr. Bell, that this is something, again, a plan that we can begin to maybe come up with a wish list and put all all these things down and begin to look at, and with the new superintendent, and begin to explore and investigate and research, and then come up with a formidable plan as to how we can actually get this done, because it doesn't seem to be the right time. And I can tell you where I am and where I live, my property value has not gone up one iota. Nothing is going up around where I am. Everything is plummeted. Everything is still there. It's not moving. And so when we begin to look at it, I think that we need to wait and take an assessment and come up with a plan. I believe in a written plan that we can follow with goals, timelines, and also beginning to look at contingencies as you go through that. And so I think it would be in our best interest that we not roll back right now, but look at in the future and begin to plan for that later on.
Mr. Orson.
Thank you. I think there are a couple things here. Look, there's always contingencies that we don't know around the corner, and if we use that as a reason, we will only go in one direction, up, which is our history in terms of our millage rate. There's always a potential recession around the corner, an economic downturn, and that justification will always keep us going in one direction, up. Looking at your own chart that you provided, which is very helpful, just looking from 14 to 15, there was a $40 million increase in local taxes levied. I get that there's a discount rate over that, but there's been significant increased funds from the local level, and we know historically that increases in funding for local school districts, large, relatively wealthy school districts, which we qualify as, the balance has shifted towards local taxes collected and away from state funds because of state cuts, which, you know, at some point we can only hope will be restored. I think we have the other part of that is we are looking for, this is not a tail wagging the dog, we're looking to the next year based on the fund balance you've already told us that you think we'll start with, and the conservative assessment of where we will be at the end of the fiscal year, which would apprise, if I understand this correctly, kind of a neutral changes in the digest and therefore the collection. So if the digest actually goes up above what the sort of 5-year plan has been, we would even be in a better position. I know this is a relatively small amount, but we have in fact over the course of the last year discussed, this is not something that we're just talking about for the first time this evening. And I think it doesn't pay heed to the fact that we have over the course of the year, as we've seen our improving financial picture, talked about having as part of what we do some return to our taxpayers who have shouldered the burden of and at a very substantial rate for the system. You know, I think it tells our community and our taxpayers that we are mindful that as economic circumstances change, that, you know, when there's a downturn, you're going to be called on to carry more of the burden. And when we are in a more favorable condition, we're going to recognize and respect that and try to at least return in some, even though it's a relatively nominal amount, some amount of money to our taxpayers. I think it's the right thing to do. I think there's always a reason not to do it. You know, you were the master of telling us, you know, budget your revenues conservatively and, you know, your expenditures, and then come under your expenditures and overcome, you know, and you can use that mentality ever. You can have $500 million in the bank, and if you don't spend it, as you know, as the professor you are, you know, in the corporate world, the companies that are most vulnerable to takeovers are the ones that are sitting on a huge pile of money because they end up paying for their own takeover when somebody gets, right? That's the history of recent takeovers. We're not in that situation, but I think we have an opportunity to say to taxpayers that we recognize that there is an improving, not a great, we're not all the way there, but a small amount that respects that they are part of the equation, so that when we have an opportunity to return at least a small amount to them, that we take advantage of that to recognize that the sacrifices they've made to carry us through the difficult times.
Question, Dr. Bell.
Mrs. Turner.
Thank you, Chair. If we roll it back, it cost us $4.4 million out of our general fund, is that correct?
It will reduce our projected revenue for the general fund by about $4.4 million based upon movement in the digest, which takes place for the next several months. Now, theoretically, the effect of that See, right now, we've got revenue of $874 million, and y'all just adopted a budget of $874 million. If you come back this quarter of a mil, theoretically, everything the same, at the end of the year, that $4 million that won't come in will come from our fund balance, which is healthy, okay? Now, but that's not a guarantee. We could over-collect in some areas and under-collect in other areas, okay? So there's really no definite answer, okay? But we would have to keep the budget balanced, assume a funding component from the fund balance to bring the revenue projection back up to the 874. So you're putting some part of the fund balance at risk at this point in time.
Thank you.
No further questions. Margaret, would you please read the, before I call for the vote, read the recommendation, the proposed recommendation.
Oh, yeah.
It is requested that the Board of Education approve the tax levy resolution setting the millage rate at 23.73 mils for maintenance and operations for fiscal year 2015-16.
Okay. That's what we're voting on. I call for the vote. I'm sorry.
Clarification is we're voting on what Mr. Orson
We are
proposed
voting
first.
we are voting on the amendment.
amendment.
If that if that fails, then we go to the original. The pass it. Yeah. Okay, at this time I call for the vote on the proposed amendment. Huh? Okay. Five to pass. Passes 5-2. Then we go. We have amended the motion. Now we'll vote on the amended motion, the amended item, and read it again so we'll know what we're voting on, Margaret.
It is requested that the Board of Education approve the tax levy resolution setting the millage rate at 23.73 mils for maintenance operations for fiscal year 2015-16.
Moved by Mr. Orson, second by Mr. McMahon. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I call for the vote. Passes 5-2.